Hi, thanks for joining us for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. I'm Chris Cooper. It's winter, but it's about time to start warm season vegetables from seed. Today, we'll show you how to grow tomatoes from seed to transplant into the garden. That's just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Natalie Baumgartner. Dr. Natalie is a residential consumer horticulture specialist with UT Extension. Good to have you here, Dr. Natalie.
Oh, always good to be on the Family Plot, Chris.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on down from Knoxville to join us. All right, so guess what? People are already asking about transplanting, right, tomatoes. But we want to start from seed to transplant to the garden.
Yeah, the seed
So how do we do
catalogs have
that?
been coming for a while,
Yes,
right?
they have been.
So yeah, so they're ready.
Okay.
And actually, I guess we would probably start maybe with timing.
Okay, let's do
And
that.
so tomatoes are something that we will start as a transplant to be most efficient with our gardening season. I mean, in some parts of the country, you have a long enough season you could direct seed, but we typically don't. And so most of the time, we'll say about 6 to 8 weeks would be a good time to get those transplants going.
Okay.
And in the more sunnier southern parts of the country, right, the more light we have in that January, February, March, April time period, the faster and many
Okay,
times
the faster, got it.
those plants will grow. So the
Okay.
earlier we are, we might be a little bit on the longer end of that
Got it.
time frame.
Okay.
I can say that for a specific example, our frost-free date in Knoxville, Tennessee, is right around the 15th of April. Well,
about
I don't
that?
aim for planting on the day,
Oh, yeah.
that we hit that 50% frost-free date. So lots of times I'll aim for in the ground, in those last couple of weeks of April or right around the 1st of
Good,
May.
that's good.
And so I will typically then count back 6 to 8 weeks and be putting my seeds in the transplant container between about the 5th and 10th of March.
Got it.
Is pretty common. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the trick. Make sure we count back to
Yeah.
6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, and as a general statement, there's lots of times that I would rather have a slightly young plant go in the ground than a very mature
And
plant.
why is that? Why is that?
Well, I mean, the more, say we have a 12, 15-week-old transplant that's just been sitting in a small transplant cell for a month, while we're waiting for the soil to warm up or get a garden prepped. That's just more time for stress to be put on
Gotcha.
that plant.
That makes sense.
Now, if it's in a large container and it has room to grow, yeah, there may be a chance of some early fruit, but oftentimes what I see is just stressing out plants in, small cell packs.
Got it. Yeah, we don't want to stress those plants out.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, gotcha.
So we figure out our timing, and then comes the fun part. Well, honestly, it's all fun, but the fun part of selecting the cultivar.
All right.
And so, of course, you may already know what your favorite tomato is, but I would always suggest try a few, a couple new ones. There's great breeding that's going on right now, and so we have more disease resistance. We have a lot of compact cultivars that do well in containers and raised beds. We're just getting a huge color profile, all sorts of novel, small cherry fruits, right? So you can get literally almost, any color, shape, size that you prefer. And
We can tell you like that, don't you? Those
I do.
different varieties
I
and
do
such.
love the multi-colored.
And we should
Yeah.
say this though, depending on where you are, check with your local extension service.
Yeah.
They may have publications about tomatoes
Yeah.
for those different varieties that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And so here in Tennessee, as well as across much of the country, our local researchers are doing trials. So, we have recommendations that are best for our area, and many, many other states do as well. And so one of the big decisions is determinate versus indeterminate.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Can we define that for the
Yeah,
people, please?
yeah.
Okay.
So we get to get into a little bit of physiology, which
Okay,
we always
let's do
love
it.
to talk about, right? So indeterminate would kind of be your heirloom, or what you think of as a traditional tomato type, and so it continues to produce leaves and flowers throughout the course of the whole growing season.
Got it.
Large stature, we need lots of support. and the fruit tends to arrive, over a longer period of time, but more consistently.
Okay.
Determinate plants have a small, naturally occurring, it's a genetic mutation, but it's, completely conventionally bred now. And it just stops that formation of new leaves after a certain period of time. And so it keeps them more compact stature. And so we call those determinate, or they terminate at a certain point.
Like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, they'll just produce leaves and flowers and leaves and flowers, and then you'll get to the top and you'll just see a group of flowers, and that's the top of the plant. And so they are a more compact habit, but they also can you'll harvest fruit over a more concentrated period of time.
Okay.
Good for canning, right? So this depends on your uses, but also your spaces.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
and there are lots of great determinate cultivars that do well in containers. Some of these that I have some examples here are Patio Choice Yellow, which is a compact determinate cultivar that's done well in recent trials. So you may want an indeterminate slicer that you get beautiful beefsteak tomatoes, but you may also have some determinate paste tomatoes because you want to do, a chunk of, sauce or salsa or something. So you can mix and match those, and then some cherry tomatoes for your salad.
Yeah, who doesn't like cherry tomatoes,
Yeah.
right? Good deal. All right, so what about materials? So let's make sure we
Yeah.
talk about that. So what do we need?
So we want to start with a good container.
Okay.
And I brought a few examples. This is what we would call kind of a solid flat. There are holes in the bottom. You can't see them, but drainage is
They're
allowed.
there.
Yeah. And then you can just seed over the top. I also brought one of these trays that has a whole lot of, actually you can see a lot of roots coming out of the bottom there. But it has a whole lot of individual cells. So if you're going to grow a lot of one cultivar, open flats can be handy. I like these because it allows a lot of different cultivars to be grown. You can see there's some basil, there's some tomatoes, some older ones, some younger ones.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of depends on how many different cultivars you're going to grow, what your space is, but making sure that you can drain well is essential.
All right.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Then we want growing media, right?
Okay, all right.
So germination mixes tend to be a finer material. Lots of times they'll have vermiculite, which is the kind of shiny, it's actually a clay material. You might also see some perlite, but it's, so it might be peat moss, it might be coconut coir, but we have good water holding capacity and we have good drainage.
Gotcha.
We don't want to just go and grab a bag that says potting mix or something like that. We want a good germination mix because this is actually organic materials, but non-soil. So it's made to drain well and provide a really good environment.
And I noticed you keep saying drain well.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we do not want water ponding in any of our containers.
Good deal.
And honestly, you can tell me, if you've experienced this. I think that people drowning out and rotting seeds is often one of the biggest problems we have.
It is. I will concur with that. You're exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, and so we'll see damping off and other elements that could be caused by low temperature. Oftentimes they're caused by a saturated media or literally just loving and taking too good
That's
care.
all. They just want to make sure
Yeah.
they're well watered.
Yeah.
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 I got you. Okay.
And for our
good.
cool season crops, it's a little bit more fluid. They can germinate at cooler temperatures, but if we're growing tomatoes, peppers, I also really like heat mat.
Okay.
So this is actually a large heat mat. You can germinate
size.
four trays full, as many tomatoes as you can possibly want. But this, one of the reasons that I really like these larger ones is because they actually have a little, temperature probe and a thermostat where you can set the temperature that you prefer. So you can just, put this in the media right where you're seeding. And for tomatoes, peppers, I like to get that between 75 and 80.
How about that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
And
good.
it's really just, it's amazing how much of a difference it will make when you have the right media temperature. Because if you're in the house, if you're in the garage and it's 65 or 70 degree air temperature, you really need to get that soil temperature up to that, 75 to 80 degrees.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so, and then, depending upon your site, you might, like I have a little dome here, that can, increase the humidity.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got a small greenhouse or something, Do not put that where it's getting direct light. You can get pretty warm.
Yeah, you can bake them.
Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
other tools that you can use, but a good container, a good media, and an ability to provide the temperature is crucial for germination. And then really soon, we'll need to move on to good lighting as well. We can talk about that maybe a little bit more when we get to care.
Okay. Good deal.
So we have a good cultivar selected. We're at the appropriate time of year
All right.
to get, a month and a half, 2-month-old seedling in the ground, and then, we have our good material and we're ready to seed. So I can kind of just demonstrate. If we want a lot of one cultivar, we could literally just open seed, right? So I want to make sure that we have a well moistened, not dripping wet, but a well moistened media, and we can literally overseed.
Just scatter them
Yeah,
out. Okay.
yeah, we can scatter.
All right.
Make sure we tag well.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That is one of the challenges that we always run into. Or we can also lots of times if we're seeding in a small cell or a row like this, I'll kind of create myself a little bit of a ditch there, and then direct seed. And most of the time we will cover, but we don't need to cover very much.
Okay.
So just a little bit of light cover. Sometimes I'll just use like a plain vermiculite or something that's really easy to sprinkle over the top. We don't want to get too deep. All we're really doing is making sure that our seeds don't rapidly dry out.
Gotcha.
These tomatoes, peppers, they're all fairly small seeds. They're
Yeah.
not like a big bean or corn that
Right,
we need,
right.
a lot
Okay.
on top of. So a light cover, and then
So these don't even have to be covered. I mean, that's fine. That's all right.
if you can keep them moist
Okay.
enough. But chances are you're going to have a little bit of variability in the moisture, and so most of the time we will go
just
ahead
lightly.
and and just lightly
Yeah.
cover so that we make sure the seeds don't dry out. Interestingly enough, when we grow microgreens and some of those other crops, lots of times we'll grow them without covering.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't know that. Okay.
Whether seeds need light to germinate is a whole,
right,
broad
right.
physiological
Right.
topic. There are some that do. Most of the time, those kinds of factors have been bred out of our common vegetables.
Okay.
So most of the time, we're just more managing the environment than we are
Okay.
those physiological conditions. So we'll cover lightly, we'll sprinkle with water, kitchen, faucet. If you need the,
spray, yeah.
the sprayer on the
yeah.
faucet, right? Because we don't want a mass volume
Right.
of water. You can get special nozzles that are kind of mist. We just don't want to move the seed or
Right, gotcha,
wash it
gotcha.
around too much. Get it on,
the heat
good
mat.
heat. Yeah. Yeah, and if you are growing in a garage or something like that where there's not a good amount of natural light, you'll want to, within the first few days, make sure that you have supplemental light, because
Okay.
it is amazing how fast they will stretch once they germinate if they don't have light.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
Okay.
for tomatoes, under good conditions, we're thinking 5 to 7 days when they're coming up, and it comes on you fast. So lots of times what I will do is just have my light setup already ready.
Oh, okay.
When I germinate. This is just an example of a 4-bulb fluorescent setting that I brought with me. Of course, it would hang.
Sure.
It would hang up
Right.
above your plants. But if you just go ahead and get that all set up at the same time, then you're ready
to go.
and you can
Okay.
prevent any stretching that will happen when germination occurs.
So what about the height of setting your lights?
Yeah. So for the most part, we can be anywhere from 4 to 8, 10 inches above the plants. And I mean, it depends on how many lights you have. This is a 4-bulb system, but we can start actually, fairly closely, and then lots of times we'll just be
Wow,
able
okay.
to move. I've got these, these
Oh,
cute
you're
little,
fancy.
yeah,
Look
yeah.
at you.
So you'll always want to keep that, a little bit above the height of the
Got you.
plants.
Okay, that's good.
And
that's good.
and when it comes to, like, we have base, calculations, you'll want to be 4 to 6 inches above the tops of the plants. But you also are going to want to use the cues of the plants.
Got it.
Do they do they start to, look a little thin and,
Okay. So we're going to be watching those seedlings. Okay,
reading
gotcha.
them. You're reading
Because
how
they will
grow.
let you know, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so too much light, too little light, and always pay close attention to the seedlings, and then you can just adjust that that height as you go.
So let me ask you this. So what if it's too much light? So what would we see? What would those seedlings exhibit?
Yeah, so sometimes in really too much light, you could actually see a little bit of bleaching.
Okay.
You might see a stressed appearance that could be in color.
Okay.
But most of the time, people will have the lights too high, and
figured,
we'll start to see
Okay.
the plants stretching
Yeah.
and reaching.
Trying to get to that, to that light. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So sometimes your germination mix will come with a little bit of fertilizer already in it.
Okay.
Look at the bag, make sure that you know what you're dealing with. And if it does, then you've bought a little bit of time there.
Okay.
But if it doesn't, then by the time you get kind of to the transplant stage, you'll want to be thinking about, a dilute soluble
Gotcha.
fertilizer
Okay.
solution. Now, we don't want to over-fertilize, but I actually brought a few not great-looking plants so that we could kind of talk about these. And so this would be, an example of a hungry tomato, right? So we're starting to see some purple on the veins. We're seeing yellowing on the leaves, and this is simply a plant that should have been transplanted a couple weeks ago. And I brought them on purpose because I kind of wanted to just share the concept that honestly I would rather plant something smaller, and younger than something that has experienced some stress or some nutrient deprivation that's older. So these would be like a month-old type of seedling, and these are only a couple weeks old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just a couple of
so
weeks.
kind of in that 2 to 4 week range, then you want to think about transplanting.
So let me ask you this. Do you prefer a soil media with fertilizer or without fertilizer?
So I actually kind of like a germination mix that has just a little bit, of fertilizer in it. And then lots of times what I'll do is, so that'll get you through this stage.
Okay.
And then when we get up to a larger container, then I'll think about, okay, what's going to be my fertilizer routine?
Gotcha.
And I'll build in a once a week or
Okay.
so
Gotcha.
fertilizer schedule. So I kind of like it. It just helps you prevent hungry.
Yeah, hungry and stressed.
Yeah,
Right.
before you get to transplanting.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so 2 to 4 weeks is oftentimes, that window when we would think about transplanting.
Okay.
These little tomatoes are on the young side, but they would certainly be fine if we, and we will actually demonstrate here some transplanting. Most of the time, we'll say we might want to wait till we start to see true leaves. And actually, these are the cotyledons, right? The seed leaves. And if you're thinking, those don't really look like
And
tomatoes.
that's you about true? You said true? Okay.
Yeah. And then the true leaves would be the leaves that really do look like tomatoes, and they're actually just starting to come there. And it will be amazing how fast these plants will grow. So honestly, I don't really have any trouble in transplanting at this size if we want to. You can see nice, light, fluffy growing mix there. And what we want to do is just, in this tray specifically, it was easy to get up under the plants, and then I just kind of lifted them out. We want to disturb the roots as little as possible, and that's one reason why, especially in a small tray like this, I don't really have a problem transplanting them when they're kind of young, because then we don't have a lot of roots to disturb. We think about these
that's a lot
these
of
plants
roots
right
there.
here, we have a lot of
Yeah.
entwined
Matted.
roots there that we're looking at, and so we'll damage and stress
Sure.
those plants more in the process. So we just want to remove a single plant. This is actually, we could transplant up into a variety of different containers.
Okay.
This is a 18 cell tray that just has individual plant containers. And I like this for, say, a gardener who wants a couple plants of several different cultivars, because then you can put a tag in each one of these, and it's a simple way.
Okay.
You can do the 6 cell packs, which we're all really familiar with. Those are 606s, and we'll get about 36 plants in a tray. So that's totally up to the gardener. One of the things that I like about these 18 cells is you can you have a lot of growing space
got it.
there, and you can
Okay.
go right to the garden
Okay.
from
With that.
here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So these just have a germination, a grow mix in there, and so you can see pretty good sized perlite
Yeah.
there for good drainage. There have been times when we've run out and I've accidentally used a germination mix in these large containers, and it slows
slowed it, okay.
down the drainage because the material is finer. So then we'll just make a little dibble with our finger.
Okay.
There in this nice loose mix.
So
and
not too
place.
deep, right? Not too deep.
Not too deep. Although on a tomato, it's not a huge thing.
So it's not, okay.
And sometimes, especially when you get a taller plant, you'll try to get that deeper in the container
Gotcha.
if you can. In this particular instance, the transplant is small. We don't need
Yeah.
to. But we know that tomatoes will root from their stems, and
Yes,
so
we do know that.
it's fine if we want to get them down in there a little bit. If we had a larger plant like this, well, we'd try to
Oh yeah, that's got to go a little
we
deeper.
tried to
Yeah.
get him
Gotcha.
deeper in that. But honestly, with the kind of with the stress that these plants have been under, it's not all that uncommon that in a few weeks this younger guy might actually be ahead.
Ah,
So we'll transplant into our container and then water in.
water. Okay.
And the water in will settle that media around those young roots because
Okay.
we want good root to media contact to allow them to take up moisture and really get going and growing. And then if, depending upon, of course, people's growing environments, they probably will want to then take that back and get it under a very well lit, setting. Of course,
some
if
more
it's
light.
warm, if it's later in the season,
All right.
they might have a place where you could get natural light. And then you are using good care until you get to close to the garden stage.
Wow, so just good care. Now, once we get close to the gardening stage, what about hardening off? That's usually a question we get quite a bit at the
Yeah.
Extension office.
Yeah, and so hardening off is really the process of letting the plants physiologically prepare for the outdoor
Okay, right.
environment. So if they're coming from a beautiful greenhouse environment or the very well lit, nice, humid environment with good temperatures that you're providing for them as you grow them at home, what we really want to do is transition them to what will be outdoor temperatures.
Okay.
Outdoor humidity, because
That's a big one.
especially if they're coming from a greenhouse, they're going to be experiencing a drop in humidity, and so that's going to impact how their leaves move water. And so there can be some changes that take place in the leaves as well as wind, right?
Ah, I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can dry them out.
Yeah,
Okay.
lots of
gotcha.
times they've been used to a
Yeah,
very
that's
still
right.
environment, and so getting some air movement
Yeah.
in there, and then bright sunlight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so lots of times for hardening off, what we'll do is start with a couple hours a day outdoors.
Okay.
It involves, I will say, a lot of carrying. This even happens to me in my trial tomatoes. The month of April is a lot
So
of
back
work.
and forth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of back and
Oh
forth.
my
Under
gosh.
ideal conditions, you might have a shade structure or someplace where you wouldn't have to move them as much. But I move them in and
Oh,
out of the
man.
greenhouse a lot. So you'll want to start with shorter periods of time and then just get them so they're spending all of their time
Got it.
outdoors for a
Okay.
week or so before
okay.
you put them in the ground. And that will help you prevent leaf damage on some of that transplant stress that'll slow them down once
Gotcha.
they get going. And then get them in the ground, give them some fertilizer, and it's going to be April and gardening season before we know it.
Yeah, they'll be ready to go.
Yeah.
So is there a certain height, that we need to get the transplants to before they, start hardening off?
So oftentimes I will kind of let the calendar help me
Oh,
make
okay, it's the calendar.
those decisions. Obviously, we want to get them up, 8, 10 inches or so, but you kind of want to think about the calendar. You want to think about what the current conditions
Yeah.
are, because I don't want to start hardening if we're just about to get a cold
Yes.
snap.
Yeah.
I had one crazy spring day where I began my hardening right before a thunderstorm and a hail event occurred. It was crazy. So you want to avoid any potentially damaging weather, but there have been times when if there's going to be a cold snap, I'll kind of wait till after that passes to get into my hardening phase, but I'd like to get a couple weeks of transitioning them
Gotcha.
to outdoor conditions before I get to my
That makes sense.
to my plant
Yeah, so
date.
we're gonna follow the calendar on
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and
Okay.
now this is a kind of a general statement, but I think that a lot of times people have larger than necessary expectations for what their
I've
garden
seen,
tomatoes.
yes.
They'll think, I need my tomato to be a foot
seen that.
tall and blooming
Yeah.
before it goes into the ground. And sometimes, a nice, stocky 10-inch plant that hasn't been stressed, that's roots are in good shape,
Gotcha.
can go and really perform well in the garden.
So it makes the difference.
Yeah.
Doc, that was so good. Yeah. So from seed to the garden.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, seed to sliced on your sandwich before too long.
Oh, that sounds good. Doc, thank you much. We appreciate that.
Yeah,
Great
absolutely.
information. Great information. Remember, we love to hear from you. Send us an email or letter. The email address is familyplot@wkno.org, and the mailing address is Family Plot, 7151 Cherry Farms Road, Cordova, Tennessee 38016. Or you can go online to familyplotgarden.com. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about growing tomatoes from seeds, we have links to extension publications on our website, familyplotgarden.com. We also have lots of videos about planting other vegetables. Be sure to join us next week for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.